Federal felony indictment against New York Attorney General Letitia James. Two sources are telling us that Attorney General Pam Bondi was caught off guard by the indictment. Let's go live now to CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes. What are you learning from your sources, Kristen?
Yeah, and this comes after CNN had already reported that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General had been hesitant to bring charges against James because of the information that they had heard from Eric Siebert, who was at that time the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. So he's since left that post. Halligan, of course, appointed by President Trump to be that handpicked U.S. Attorney in that district. And we are told Halligan did not coordinate with the Department of Justice on this. That is why these officials, including the Attorney...
Okay. So the Justice Department is in absolute chaos right now, and this isn't some behind-the-scenes drama that'll blow over in a news cycle. This is Attorney General Pam Bondi facing what appears to be an unprecedented revolt from within the federal judiciary, and the evidence that just surfaced is so damaging that people inside the administration are already whispering about whether she can survive this. We're talking about federal judges, the people who are supposed to maintain institutional independence from political pressure, essentially declaring that they've lost confidence in the nation's top law enforcement official. This is massive, this is historic, and this could fundamentally reshape the relationship between the executive branch and the federal courts for years to come. When federal judges start publicly pushing back against an attorney general, you're not dealing with normal political friction anymore. You're dealing with a constitutional crisis in the making, because the entire system depends on the Justice Department maintaining at least the appearance of independence from political manipulation. And right now, that appearance is collapsing in real time. Now, before we get into exactly what happened and why this matters so much, let's be honest about something. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They'll give you the surface-level drama, the sound bites, the theatrical moments, but they won't connect the dots. They won't tell you what this actually means for the balance of power in Washington, for the rule of law, for what comes next. That's why we built Politic Insane, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And, if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth, this is your moment. Subscribe. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the situation, because we want to hear what you think about federal judges taking this kind of stand. All right, let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. Multiple federal judges, including several appointed by Republican presidents, have filed what legal experts are calling extraordinary public objections to directives that came directly from Pam Bondi's Justice Department. We're not talking about routine disagreements over case management or scheduling. We're talking about judges saying in official court filings that the Attorney General's office attempted to interfere with judicial independence, tried to influence pending cases, and potentially violated the separation of powers that's supposed to keep the executive branch from controlling the courts. The evidence that emerged includes internal DOJ emails, leaked communications between Justice Department officials and White House staff, and testimony from career prosecutors who say they were explicitly told to prioritize cases based on political considerations rather than legal merit. One email, which was obtained by investigators and has now been circulated among legal circles, reportedly shows a senior Bondi aide instructing prosecutors to align charging decisions with administration priorities on cases involving immigration enforcement and federal election laws. Another communication allegedly references direct pressure from the White House to delay certain prosecutions until after the 2026 midterms, which, if true, would be an absolutely stunning violation of the Justice Department's independence protocols. And this is where things start to unravel. Pam Bondi, who built her reputation as a loyalist to Trump during his first impeachment trial and has been a consistent defender of his legal strategy, apparently tried to implement what sources describe as a coordination protocol between the Justice Department and the White House that goes far beyond what previous administrations have done. The protocol allegedly included weekly briefings to White House counsel on active investigations, advance notice to political staff about potential indictments, and consultation with administration officials on prosecutorial decisions that could have political ramifications. Career prosecutors inside DOJ started raising red flags internally months ago, warning that these practices violated long-standing policies designed to insulate criminal investigations from political interference. When those warnings were ignored, several of them began documenting everything, creating a paper trail that has now become the evidentiary foundation for the judicial revolt we're seeing. Federal judges started noticing something was wrong when they began seeing unusual patterns in how the Justice Department was handling cases. Prosecutions that should have moved forward were mysteriously delayed. Cases that seemed weak on the merits were being aggressively pursued. Sentencing recommendations were being revised at the last minute in ways that favored politically connected defendants. At first, individual judges raised concerns in their own courtrooms, issuing pointed orders demanding explanations from DOJ attorneys. But when those explanations were either unsatisfactory or contradicted by the evidence, the judges started comparing notes. What they discovered was a pattern of what they're now calling systemic political interference in the administration of justice. The revolt crystallized when a group of federal judges, led by several chief judges from different circuits, took the extraordinary step of sending a joint letter to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees, formally requesting an investigation into the Attorney General's conduct. The letter, which is now public, doesn't mince words. It states that the signatories have grave concerns about the integrity of the Department of Justice under current leadership, and that they have observed conduct that appears to violate both department policies and constitutional principles. But it gets worse. The shocking evidence that has Bondi reportedly breaking down behind closed doors includes recordings of phone calls between Justice Department officials and White House staff discussing specific cases, including cases involving Trump allies and cases involving investigations into potential administration misconduct. One recording allegedly captures a DOJ official saying that they need to kill an investigation before it becomes a problem for us politically. Another reportedly includes discussion of using prosecutorial resources to send a message to Trump critics, including journalists and political opponents. These recordings were apparently made by a career DOJ official who became concerned about what they were witnessing and decided to document it, then turned the recordings over to the Inspector General. The Inspector General's office has confirmed it's conducting an investigation, and sources say the preliminary findings are deeply troubling. The evidence also includes documents showing that Bondi's Justice Department compiled what's being called an enemies list of individuals and organizations that the administration wanted investigated or prosecuted. The list allegedly includes Democratic officials, certain federal judges who ruled against Trump policies, journalists who reported critically on the administration, and even some Republicans who were insufficiently loyal during Trump's various legal battles. If this is accurate, and multiple sources now confirm these documents exist, we're talking about the weaponization of federal law enforcement in a way that echoes some of the darkest moments in American history, the kind of thing that led to the post-Watergate reforms that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. Pam Bondi's response has been a disaster. Initially, she tried to dismiss the judge's concerns as partisan attacks and claimed that she's simply enforcing the law without fear or favor. But that defense collapsed almost immediately when career prosecutors started coming forward, some publicly and others through confidential channels to congressional investigators, confirming that the concerns raised by the judges are absolutely justified. Bondi then attempted to blame subordinates, suggesting that any inappropriate conduct was the result of overzealous staff acting without her knowledge. That defense also fell apart when the evidence showed that she was directly involved in many of the decisions being questioned, including personally approving the coordination protocol with the White House and signing off on specific prosecutorial strategies that career attorneys had warned were improper. Sources inside the Justice Department say Bondi held at least one meeting where she became visibly emotional, reportedly breaking down when confronted with the extent of the evidence against her and the reality that she's losing the confidence of not just the federal judiciary but also the career professionals within her own department. Now let's talk about the legal and institutional framework here, because this isn't just political drama. This cuts to the core of how American democracy is supposed to function. The Department of Justice is part of the executive branch, which means the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the President and is responsible for executing the administration's legal priorities. But there's a crucial distinction, a line that's existed since the post-Watergate reforms between setting broad policy priorities and interfering in specific criminal investigations and prosecutions. The guiding principle is that prosecutorial decisions must be based on facts and law, not on whether the target or the timing helps the president politically. This principle exists because without it, you don't have the rule of law, you have rule by law, where the legal system becomes a tool of political power rather than a neutral arbiter of justice. The regulations governing this are actually quite clear. DOJ has internal policies that strictly limit contact between the White House and the department on pending criminal matters. The policy states that such contacts should be limited to the Attorney General and specific senior officials, should only occur when necessary for policy coordination or national security, and should never involve discussions of specific investigative or prosecutorial decisions in a way that could influence outcomes based on political considerations. What the evidence now suggests is that the Bondi Justice Department essentially ignored these policies, creating informal channels of communication that allowed political considerations to infect prosecutorial decision-making at multiple levels. The key words are political considerations. Presidents have always had policy priorities. Obama prioritized civil rights enforcement and white-collar crime. Trump's first term prioritized immigration and national security. That's normal and appropriate. What's not normal or appropriate is making decisions about whether to charge someone or when to charge them or how aggressively to pursue a case based on whether it helps or hurts the president's political standing. The historical context matters enormously here. After Watergate, when it became clear that Richard Nixon had used the Justice Department and the FBI to target political enemies and protect political allies, Congress and the Justice Department itself implemented reforms designed to create institutional walls between political decision-making and prosecutorial independence. These reforms included clearer policies on White House contacts, stronger protections for career prosecutors, and the creation of the Inspector General system to investigate misconduct. The principle was simple. Democracy requires that the legal system operate independently of partisan need. Politics, because if it doesn't, those in power can use the law to entrench themselves and punish opponents. This principle has been tested before. We saw controversies during the Clinton administration over the firing of U.S. attorneys. We saw them during the Bush administration over the politicization of hiring at DOJ. We saw them during Trump's first term over his pressure on various investigations. But what's emerging now appears to be more systematic, more brazen, and more directly tied to specific cases in ways that cross lines previous controversies only approached. The institutional stakes are absolutely enormous. Federal judges are independent precisely so they can check executive power. When judges start saying publicly that they can't trust the Justice Department to handle cases fairly, the entire system is in jeopardy. Cases start getting decided not on their merits, but on assumptions about improper motivations. The public loses confidence in law enforcement. Career prosecutors face impossible choices between following orders and upholding their professional obligations. And most fundamentally, the precedent gets set that an attorney general can subordinate law enforcement to politics without facing real consequences. If Pam Bondi survives this, if she's able to weather this revolt and remain in office, it sends a message to every future attorney general that the post-Watergate norms are optional, that the independence protocols are suggestions, that you can coordinate with the White House on criminal cases as long as you're willing to endure some criticism and ride it out. That would be a fundamental transformation of American governance, and not in a good way. Okay, let's break down what this actually means in practical terms, because there are multiple layers to this crisis and they all matter. First, understand that the immediate impact is already devastating for the Justice Department's credibility. Every case that DOJ is currently prosecuting is now subject to scrutiny about whether it was brought for legitimate reasons or political ones. Defense attorneys in cases across the country are already filing motions, raising the specter of political interference, arguing that their clients are being targeted because of their political affiliations or because prosecuting them serves the administration's interests. Some of these motions will be frivolous, but some will be legitimate, and judges are going to have to sort through them, which creates chaos and delay. Meanwhile, cases that should be prosecuted might not be, because career prosecutors are now going to be second-guessing everything, worried about whether they're being used as political pawns. Second, the institutional damage to the relationship between the Justice Department and the federal judiciary is going to take years to repair, if it can be repaired at all. Judges rely on prosecutors to be honest with them, to present evidence fairly, to make representations to the court that can be trusted. When judges start operating from the assumption that they can't trust what DOJ attorneys tell them, the entire system slows down and becomes adversarial in ways it's not supposed to be. We're already seeing judges demanding more documentation, asking more skeptical questions, and requiring DOJ to meet higher burdens of proof than they normally would. This makes everything less efficient and creates more opportunities for cases to fall apart on procedural grounds. Third, the political ramifications heading into 2026 are massive. Democrats now have a ready-made campaign issue about corruption and the rule of law. They can point to federal judges, including Republican appointees, revolting against a Republican attorney general, and argue that this administration has abandoned any pretense of governing within constitutional norms. Republicans are going to be forced to either defend Bondi, which puts them on the wrong side of the judiciary and creates vulnerability with voters who care about law and order, or distance themselves from her, which creates a rift with Trump and the MAGA base that still dominates the party. Moderate Republicans, the ones in competitive districts who need to appeal to independents, are in an impossible position. If they defend Bondi, they look like they're endorsing corruption. If they criticize her, they risk primary challenges from the right. Some of them are already quietly telling reporters that they wish she would resign so they don't have to take a position. Fourth, there's an international dimension that people aren't talking enough about. The rule of law is one of America's core strengths in global affairs. It's what distinguishes us from authoritarian regimes. It's what makes international partners willing to trust our commitments and cooperate on everything from trade to security. When it becomes clear that the U.S. Justice Department is being run as a political operation, that credibility evaporates. Foreign governments start wondering whether extradition treaties will be honored fairly, whether cooperation on terrorism or transnational crime will be handled professionally, whether the United States can be counted on to enforce international agreements based on their terms rather than on political convenience. European allies are particularly concerned because many of them are already skeptical of this administration's commitment to democratic norms. This scandal confirms their worst fears and makes it harder for them to justify continued close cooperation. Fifth, think about what this means for ongoing and future investigations. The Justice Department has critical work to do on everything from domestic terrorism to cybersecurity to public corruption to transnational organized crime. All of that work depends on career professionals who believe they're operating within an institution that respects their expertise and protects them from political pressure. Right now, morale inside DOJ, reportedly at an all-time low. Career prosecutors are updating their resumes. Experienced attorneys are leaving for private practice or other government agencies. The institutional knowledge and expertise that make DOJ effective are walking out the door. And the people who remain are going to be extremely cautious, which means cases that should be pursued won't be, investigative leads won't be followed, and threats to public safety won't be addressed as aggressively as they should be. The damage here extends far beyond Pam Bondi's personal future. This is about the long-term capacity of federal law enforcement to do its job. Sixth, there's the question of what happens next procedurally and politically. The House and Senate Judiciary Committees are now going to hold hearings, which means Bondi is going to have to testify under oath. She's going to be asked directly about the emails, the recordings, the coordination with the White House, the alleged enemies list. She's either going to have to admit to conduct that could be illegal, lie and risk perjury charges, or invoke executive privilege and take the Fifth Amendment, all of which would be politically catastrophic. The Inspector General's investigation is ongoing, and when that report comes out, it could include criminal referrals if the evidence shows that laws were broken. There's also the possibility of impeachment. Democrats will certainly call for it, and while Republicans control both chambers right now, if the evidence is damning enough and the political cost of defending her becomes too high, you could see some Republicans deciding that Bondi has to go. It wouldn't be the first time a cabinet official has been impeached, and the threshold is high crimes and misdemeanors, which absolutely includes using the Justice Department for political purposes. Seventh, consider the broader implications for executive power and accountability. If Bondi can coordinate with the White House on criminal cases without facing removal or criminal charges herself, it sets a precedent that fundamentally expands what future presidents can do. Every administration will have an enemies list. Every administration will try to use law enforcement to help friends and hurt opponents. The post-Watergate settlement, the informal understanding that certain lines won't be crossed even if they're not explicitly illegal, will be dead. We'll be in a new era where the only constraint on executive abuse is what you can get away with politically. That's a recipe for democratic backsliding, where each administration pushes further than the last, where institutions erode incrementally until they no longer function as meaningful checks on power. This is how democracies die, not in dramatic coups, but in gradual normalization of behavior that previous generations would have found disqualifying. Eighth, there's what this means for Trump personally and his legal strategy going forward. Trump has multiple legal issues still pending, or potentially arising, including various civil cases, potential state prosecutions, and the question of whether there will be federal investigations into conduct during his first term or his 2024 campaign. Having an attorney general who's willing to coordinate with the White House on criminal matters is obviously valuable to him, but if Bondi is fatally weakened or forced out, Trump loses that protection, and a new attorney general, even if handpicked by Trump, is going to be under enormous scrutiny and pressure to demonstrate independence. This scandal makes it much harder for Trump to use the Justice Department as a shield or a sword. It also gives ammunition to prosecutors in state cases who are already arguing that Trump has a pattern of trying to manipulate law enforcement. The evidence emerging in the Bondi scandal can be used in other proceedings to establish Trump's mindset and his approach to legal accountability. Ninth, we need to think about what this means for the rule of law as a concept in American political culture. For a long time, both parties at least paid lip service to the idea that justice should be blind, that the legal system shouldn't be a tool of partisan warfare. That consensus has been fraying for years, but it still existed as an aspiration, something both sides would claim to support, even when they accused each other of violating it. This scandal, and particularly the defense of Bondi from Trump allies who are essentially arguing that, of course, the Attorney General should help the president politically because that's what loyalty means, represents a more fundamental break. It's not just violating the norm, it's rejecting the norm as naive or outdated. If that becomes the dominant view, if we reach a point where a significant portion of the country believes that using law enforcement for political purposes is just how the game is played, then we're in very dangerous territory. The rule of law doesn't exist just because it's written in statutes or the Constitution. It exists because people believe in it, because there's a shared commitment to the principle that law binds everyone equally. When that belief dies, the law becomes nothing more than the will of whoever has power at the moment. 10th, watch what happens with career prosecutors and DOJ alumni over the next few weeks. Hundreds of former Justice Department officials, including former attorneys general and deputy attorneys general from both parties, have already started speaking out, releasing statements condemning what's happening and calling for accountability. This matters because these are people who have credibility on the issue, who can't be dismissed as partisan hacks. When former Republican attorney generals say that a Republican attorney general has crossed a line, that carries weight. These voices are going to be critical in shaping the narrative and putting pressure on Republican senators who might otherwise be inclined to circle the wagons. Also, watch for current career prosecutors to start testifying, either in congressional hearings or in the Inspector General investigation. Every prosecutor who comes forward and says, "Yes, I was told to make decisions based on political considerations," is another nail in the coffin. The trickle of evidence is going to become a flood, and each new revelation is going to make Bondi's position more untenable. So here's the bottom line. This is not a scandal that's going to fade into the background. This is a direct confrontation between the federal judiciary and the executive branch over the fundamental question of whether the Justice Department can be run as a political operation. The judges are saying no forcefully and publicly, backed by evidence that appears to be overwhelming. Pam Bondi is in an impossible position, facing a revolt she can't contain, evidence she can't explain away, and political dynamics that are only going to get worse for her as more information comes out. The White House is going to have to make a decision about whether Bondi is worth protecting, and that calculation is going to be based not on principle, but on politics, on whether defending her costs more than cutting her loose. For the country, this is a constitutional crisis that's going to shape the balance of power between institutions for years to come. If Bondi survives despite everything, it means the post-Watergate norms are dead and we're in a new era of politicized law enforcement. If she's forced out, it might signal that there are still some lines that can't be crossed. That institutional pushback can still work, but even then, the damage to the Justice Department's credibility and effectiveness is going to take years to repair. This is a story about power, about accountability, about whether the legal system can remain independent of partisan politics, and the answer we get is going to define American democracy for the next decade. Keep your eyes on this. Watch whether Republicans break with Bondi or defend her. Watch what comes out of the Inspector General's investigation. Watch whether the judiciary continues to push back or whether judges decide it's not worth the fight. This story is far from over, and what happens next could reshape everything.